first of all, thank you very much for this exposition. You mentioned at one point education and your tolerant interest in the sciences. Now, what I would like to know is to what extent in your academy or in Tibetan Buddhist education in general, what the relation is between secular topics like mathematics and natural science and the religious topics. Are young people who enter your monastic institutions also, besides mantra, tantra, yantra, also learning something about mathematics and physics and chemistry? So what is the relation between these different knowledges in education of Tibetan Buddhist young novices and maybe also lay people if they have a task for educating lay people?
I completely agree with Professor van der Veer. Generally speaking, Buddhism is considered a major academic discipline here. Before formally studying Buddhism, we encourage young people to attend regular schools to learn sciences like chemistry and physics, as well as other secular subjects such as astronomy and geography. Are these courses included in the Buddhist curriculum? Yes, they certainly are. For instance, astrology has always been a traditional course in Tibetan Buddhism. It covers not only ordinary astrology, but also astronomy. Now, regarding chemistry, while we don't teach pure sciences like chemistry directly in our academy, the fundamental principles of chemistry and physics are indeed incorporated into our curriculum by certain Dharma masters who have studied these subjects specifically. We also invite many specialists to give lectures on these topics. Other religions today also incorporate science into their education. Similarly, we engage in dialogue with scientific scholars.
Thank you very much for your talks. I don't know much about Tibetan Buddhism, but I'm a little bit enlightened today. Also because that I'm glad to hear that more and more Chinese people are interested in Tibetan Buddhism. At one point in your talk, you was mentioning that there is a general trend, and also particularly in China, the economic development driving people into an empty and meaningless life. So that kind of fast food life, where people are under so much pressure and found emptiness of their soul. So that's the reason, one of the main reasons why they are driven to Tibetan Buddhism. That point is very common in the sociology of religion, but at the same time it also raised another question that is, at least to me, it seemed like is that true that your follower, your religion is more attractive to richer people, the people who have the luxury of realizing that life is not all about money, but also about something else? Because a lot of other people who are poor and just see the need of putting food on the table, they don't have that chance to think that they want to have a more meaningful life and so on. So that's my first question, that is that true, that what you mean?
I believe Chinese practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism come from very diverse backgrounds. There are elderly people among them. Since Buddhism emphasizes teachings about the afterlife, it naturally attracts senior citizens. It also attracts people from poor backgrounds who have experienced suffering and turn to Buddhism for guidance. There are also intellectuals who sense that there must be much deeper knowledge beyond their current understanding. They are rational yet open to new possibilities. There are also wealthy people who are interested in accumulating spiritual merit. From what I've observed, Buddhism has always attracted people from all walks of life. But what's most important is that when ordinary people encounter suffering, when most people face forms of suffering, they typically become frightened. But once they practice Buddhism, they learn to accept suffering as a natural phenomenon and actually find peace within that suffering. Before studying Tibetan Buddhism, many people easily become apathetic or unhappy, feeling bored or depressed in life, whether they're rich or poor. Later, when they understand that life is based on various causes and conditions, and once they truly grasp this understanding, no matter what happens in life, they develop the courage to face anything. I think this is the key difference. Because in fast food culture, people primarily focus on their own interests, and life generally revolves around personal benefit above all else.
Well, first, my thanks also for the talk. Great having you here to give it. I was interested, like Tom, in the kind of description of the growing interest in Buddhism, and particularly Tibetan Buddhism in China, as in one way arising out of the growth of fast food culture and so forth. And then he also mentioned a growing interest in the West in Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. And of course, we invented fast food culture. And so, maybe it follows on people's growing dissatisfaction with this type of lifestyle and so forth. But I would also say, having lived in California and so forth, like you, Dan, that a lot of Westerners are interested in Buddhism and so forth, but they themselves would like a kind of fast food Buddhism. Just like to take bits and get an instant gratification and so forth. And does he see this as particularly problematic, or at least a little bit of Buddhism is good for people, or could there be great misunderstandings and problems arising out of a kind of just taking for a kind of instant gratification Buddhism?
We must acknowledge that fast food culture provides immediate satisfaction. It satisfies people's immediate psychological needs. At the same time, I want to point out that because people are extremely busy in modern society, if we teach over extended periods or elaborate too extensively, many Buddhists I know personally would fall asleep during lengthy theoretical discussions, but they readily accept what benefits them in the teachings. Of course, fast food culture is a Western term that allows people to easily understand its benefits. I once had a conversation with a Western scientist. His impression of Tibetan Buddhism was that some teacher-student relationships begin with emotional impulse, but some people eventually withdraw because once they've experienced this initial excitement, their passion fades away. However, some people continue to deepen their understanding of Buddhist teachings. These teachings aren't obtained simply by taking refuge. These teachings aren't gained just by taking refuge or performing simple rituals or simply offering incense and prostrating in monasteries. These are merely formalities. As I mentioned earlier, what's most important is that Buddhist teachings are truly profound. Both I, who have studied Buddhism for years, and many other scholars acknowledge that the Buddha's teachings are truly unfathomable. When you truly understand these teachings, you become an authentic Buddhist. In my opinion, some aspects of fast food culture may disappear as quickly as they appear, but there are still cases where people not only gain immediate benefits, but continue to be nourished by deeper meaning over time. Eventually, they become self-reliant through the Dharma. It's not that I'm praising Buddhism because I'm a Buddhist. I'm simply trying to explain this in terms that can be readily understood within Western culture.
I also wanted to thank you so much for your wonderful teaching today. So especially I appreciate that you also shed light on the dialogue and interaction, between the religious and the scientific, between the traditional and the modern. So I'm interested in particularly inter-religious dialogue or competition in that sense. So particularly you are also focusing on also, the universities in China and university students and intellectuals. So far in my understanding, universities has been always a competing stage for all different kind of religious missionization processes. So I was wondering whether you have encountered any kinds of difficulties in teaching Tibetan Buddhism in universities by other, so for example, Christian missionaries or Christian mission groups in the university. Maybe in China there's maybe some kind of not officially, but still the house churches, also lots of so campus temples and missionaries also pretty active in my understanding. So I was wondering how to deal with, or whether you have that kind of sort of field encounters, and then what would you like, and also what have you dealt with this inter-religious or intra-religious dialogue and competition?
As I mentioned earlier, nowadays Buddhism has spread throughout the world without encountering any major obstacles. For instance, In China, traditional culture includes Confucianism and Taoism, which together are called Ru Shi Dao in Chinese, that is Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. These form China's traditional cultural foundation. Historically, there were certainly some debates between Taoism and Buddhism, but today, many Taoist practitioners accept and respect Buddhism quite openly. Buddhists also learn from Taoist ideas. I've read the Tao Te Ching and Confucian texts like the Standards for Students. I actually translated Standards for Students into Tibetan. Throughout this process, whether giving talks at universities or teaching at various centers, I haven't encountered obstacles. As we know, Chinese Buddhism has its own monastic system that's separate from Tibetan Buddhism. However, I've visited many important temples, particularly ancestral temples, of Pure Land and Zen Buddhism, and was warmly welcomed by their senior monks. So historically speaking, there were many conflicts between religions and between religious and non-religious groups. But in modern society, most people are very open-minded and inclusive, especially the younger generation. They're very receptive to different cultures, whether it's religion or science. Most people approach them with an open mind. Speaking from my own experience, I can't recall encountering any major difficulties from religious groups or being troubled by such issues. I can't honestly recall any instances.
Maybe I'll just stand so that you can see me. My question relates to your statement concerning suffering and how students are taught to accept them in the Buddhist mode of thinking. I will draw from my interviews, my preliminary research among some members of Soka Gakkai in Singapore. Soka Gakkai, as we know, is perceived and presents itself as a very modern form of Buddhism, right? Nichiren Buddhism certainly, but very modern in terms of its practical applications. Whereas Buddhism, as I heard it from you, sir, teaches that suffering needs to be taken as part of one's life. Soka Gakkai youth, at least the ones that I've interviewed, and I think this is one of the reasons why Soka Gakkai Buddhism is attractive to many young people in Singapore, is that it teaches them to be overcomers. So to have this conquering spirit, that suffering is not the issue. The issue is really how to conquer that. The challenges in life, the challenges in school, the challenges in the workplace, and so on and so forth, which I think it may run counter to our traditional Buddhist understanding of suffering, and is very modern in that sense. Thank you.
In Buddhism, there are many approaches to dealing with suffering. Different levels offer different explanations. Different Buddhist schools have different approaches. Theravada Buddhism has its own explanations, while Mahayana and Vajrayana each have their respective approaches. I'd like to discuss some Mahayana methods. People generally think life should be happy and that they should pursue happiness. But in reality, there's so much unhappiness in our lives. When we encounter these unhappy situations, we can use two methods to address them. The first is to examine where the suffering originates. For example, when you search for the mind that suffers, does it have a color or shape? What does it actually look like? Scientists believe the mind is based in the brain, but this is difficult to prove. When I observe my own mind, I can't find the suffering anywhere. This is a rather sophisticated and abstract method. The second approach is to recognize that all the stresses we experience naturally arise as part of life. It has nothing to do with unfairness. Nowadays, suicide has become quite common among young people. In reality, life offers so many possibilities. If we focus on just one thing, whether it's relationships or work stress, and become overly attached to it, we end up creating our own suffering. So understanding the nature of suffering is essential for us. If you have a higher level perspective and search for where this suffering mind exists, you'll discover it exists nowhere. Or if your understanding doesn't reach this level, it's still important to understand that suffering isn't necessarily worth suffering over. We shouldn't run away from suffering when it arises, nor should we respond to it in extreme ways. Instead, we should accept suffering as a reality and face it with wisdom.
First of all, I would like to sincerely thank Khenpo for this lecture. Because I am also doing research on the sociology of religion at Peking University, Tibetan Buddhism, due to its certain distance from the inland regions, and also because there aren't as many lamas. Considering this, do you think this will cause some obstacles to the spread of Tibetan Buddhism, also Han Chinese Buddhism? In the process of the spread of Tibetan Buddhism, what kind of role does it play? Thank you very much, Khenpo.
I've mentioned this issue before. It's actually quite simple. Tibetan Buddhism has no intention of dominating any religion or to convert people from other religions or non-religious backgrounds. There are some religions and ruling classes in the world that, in order to meet their own goals, expand their communities through various forms of propaganda and education. Speaking for myself and most Tibetan Buddhist scholars, we have no such intentions whatsoever. We regard Buddhism as pure spiritual education. Based on my own experience, I believe the essence of Buddhism, including its wisdom, compassion, and tolerance, is exactly what humanity needs. It represents a highly civilized spiritual treasure. Given this spiritual treasure, on one hand, we need to dispel misunderstandings about it, because some people view Tibetan Buddhism, because some people see Tibetan Buddhism or Buddhism in general as very traditional, closed off, and conservative, or as superficially secularized. We definitely need to correct these misconceptions. On the other hand, if a religion can benefit humanity and the world, we especially hope that such religious teachings and philosophies can be acknowledged and understood by most people. That's why I have continued promoting Buddhism for so many years. Regarding your final question about the role of Chinese Buddhism, while Tibetan and Han people do have many cultural and ideological differences, some philosophical and cultural conflicts, Buddhism itself is not narrow-minded thinking. From Buddhism's own perspective, I don't see any major obstacles preventing its spread anywhere. Most people are genuinely willing to learn about Buddhism. I myself continue studying Chinese Buddhism. I personally continue learning from Chinese Buddhist teachings, as well as other religions and various social sciences from non-religious perspectives. I believe this approach is quite necessary.
Thank you. Appreciate it.